My daughter put something strange in my drink when she thought I wasn't looking. A toast to my dear old dad, she said with a smile. I just thanked her and discreetly switched glasses with her husband, who has always criticized my life choices. 45 minutes later, he was slurring his words and could barely stand up straight. I'm so happy you're here. Just so you know, this is a real story, but to protect the identity of the person who shared it, we've chosen to use fictional names. Stick with me until the end, and drop the name of your city in the comments so I can see just how far this story has traveled. The look of horror on Cynthia's face was something I'll never forget. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting between the glass I'd been drinking. From and her husband Thomas's rapidly deteriorating state. I simply kept sipping, maintaining eye contact with my daughter over the rim of my glass. "Is everything all right, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. How had we gotten here? I used to carry her on my shoulders, through the park every Sunday, her little hands gripping my forehead for balance as she squealed with delight. I used to bandage scraped knees and chase away the monsters under her bed. I spent 30 years behind a pharmacy counter, measuring medications to the microgram, just to put her through the best schools. The irony wasn't lost on me. A retired pharmacist being drugged by his own daughter. The signs had been there for months, but I'd refused to see them. The frequent visits that always coincided with discussions about my finances, the casual questions about my will and property deed, the way they inspected my medicine cabinet when they thought I was occupied, with dinner preparations, the too loud conversations about seniors' facilities and memory care within earshot of my study. I'm 72, not senile. My hands may shake when I'm tired, but my mind remains sharp as ever. Sharp enough to notice when my blood pressure medicine looked slightly different last month. Sharp enough to recognize the subtle changes in my coffee's taste every time Cynthia prepared it for me. Thomas slumped forward in his chair, his forehead nearly hitting his plate of roast beef and potatoes. Cynthia rushed to his side, whispering urgently into his ear as she struggled to keep him upright. "Maybe he should lie down," I suggested, standing up to help. "The guest bedroom is made up." "Dad, I've got this," Cynthia snapped, a flash of panic crossing her face. "Just stay there." I sat back down, outwardly compliant. Inside, decades of disappointment crystallized into something harder, colder, more resolute. "Of course, sweetheart, whatever you think is best." I thought about Rebecca then. My wife, gone 15 years now to breast cancer. How she'd squeeze my hand 3 times. Our code for "I love you," even in her final days when speaking required too much effort. What would she say if she could see what our daughter had become? As Cynthia half-carried Thomas from the dining room, I quietly pulled out my phone and took a picture of my untouched drink and Thomas's empty glass. Then I carefully collected both glasses, wrapped them in a clean dish towel, and placed them in a Ziploc bag I'd stored in my jacket pocket. 30 years as a pharmacist had taught me the importance of evidence. I'd suspected something was wrong for weeks. The dizziness that came only after meals they prepared. The gaps in my memory following our family movie nights, where Cynthia always insisted on mixing the drinks. The fatigue that seemed to hit me like a truck precisely when they needed me. Too tired to attend meetings with my financial advisor. Last Tuesday, I'd found a prescription bottle in their guest bathroom. Lorazepam, a sedative I'd never been prescribed. The label had been partially peeled off, but I recognized Dr. Winter's name, Thomas's physician, not mine. That's when I knew with certainty, and that's when I began to plan. I helped Cynthia get Thomas settled in the guest bedroom, maintaining my concerned father facade. My daughter's hands trembled as she pulled a blanket over her husband. "Dad, I'm so sorry about dinner," she said, her voice strained. "Thomas has been working so hard lately, I think he's just exhausted." "No need to apologize," I replied, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. "These things happen." Her shoulders relaxed slightly under my touch, She believed I was still the same trusting father I'd always been, the one who never questioned. Her explanations for the dwindling funds in my checking account, the one who didn't notice when family heirlooms went missing after their visits, the one who would eventually sign whatever documents they put in front of me, whether I understood them or not. She had no idea that something fundamental had changed the moment I saw her slip those crushed pills into my drink. "Why don't I make us some tea?" I offered. "You look like you could use something calming." "That would be nice," she said, her relief palpable. In the kitchen, I went through the motions of preparing tea while my mind raced through decades of memories. Teaching Cynthia to ride a bike in the park, her face determined despite the scraped knees. Helping her pack for college, trying to hide my tears as Rebecca took photo after photo. Walking her down the aisle on her wedding day, my chest tight, with pride and grief that her mother wasn't there to see how beautiful she looked. When had my little girl become this stranger capable of such betrayal? Was it when she met Thomas, with his expensive tastes and perpetual dissatisfaction? Was it after the housing market crash when they lost their investment property? Or had this coldness always been inside her, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge? I carried the teacups back to the guest room, having added nothing more than honey to either one. Tonight wasn't the night for retaliation, just confirmation and evidence gathering. I needed to understand the full scope of their plan before I made my move. "He's still out cold," Cynthia said, accepting the teacup with a distracted nod. "I don't understand what happened." "Maybe it was an interaction with his medication," I suggested innocently. "What's he taking these days?" "Just blood pressure pills," she answered too quickly. "Nothing that would cause this." The lie hung between us, another piece of evidence for my mental file. We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching Thomas's chest rise and fall in sedated sleep. I wondered what she was thinking behind those familiar blue eyes. Rebecca's eyes. Was she recalculating her plan? Wondering if I suspected anything? Or was she simply annoyed at the delay in whatever they'd intended to happen tonight? "Dad," she finally said, setting down her teacup, "Thomas and I have been talking. We're worried about you living alone in this big house. All these stairs, the maintenance." And there it was, the conversation they'd been steering toward for months. "It's a lot for someone your age to manage," she continued, her voice taking on that condescending tone people use with children and the elderly. "We think it might be time to consider alternatives." I nodded slowly, playing my part in this charade one last time. "What kind of alternatives did you have in mind?" The relief on her face was almost comical. She launched into their well-rehearsed pitch about a wonderful senior living community just 20 minutes from their house. How I'd have my own apartment but with help nearby if needed. How they could visit every weekend. How selling this house, my home for 40 years, would free up resources for a comfortable retirement. I noticed she never mentioned who would manage those freed-up resources. "That's certainly something to think about," I said when she finished. "Why don't we discuss it more tomorrow when Thomas is feeling better? It's getting late, and I'm rather tired." "Oh, of course," Cynthia said, standing up. "Should we stay over? To keep an eye on you. I mean, to help with Thomas in the morning." The slip was telling. To keep an eye on me after whatever they'd planned to put in my system. "That won't be necessary," I said firmly. "I may be old, but I can still manage. A night in my own home. Thomas seems stable, just sleeping it off. Whatever it is." I saw a flash of frustration cross her face before her smile returned. "If you're sure, Dad, we'll come back first thing tomorrow." After they'd settled in for the night, Cynthia reluctantly accepting the guest room situation, I retreated to my study and locked the door. From my desk drawer, I retrieved a small notebook where I'd been documenting every suspicious incident over the past 3 months. To tonight's entry, I added detailed notes about the drink switching, Thomas's symptoms, and Cynthia's reaction. I secured the bagged glasses in my personal safe behind the bookshelf, the one Cynthia knew nothing about. As I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at me was lined with age but also hardened with resolve. My hands, spotted with liver spots and slightly gnarled from arthritis, clenched the edge of the sink until my knuckles whitened. They thought I was just a feeble old man, I whispered to my reflection. Their first mistake. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I lay awake planning my next moves with the methodical precision that had made me a respected pharmacist for 3 decades. By dawn, I knew exactly what needed to be done. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. This was about justice, consequences. Teaching my daughter and her husband that some betrayals cannot be forgiven or forgotten. Rebecca had always said I was too trusting, too willing to see the good in people even when they showed me their worst. Not everyone deserves your loyalty, Edward, she used to tell me. For the first time, I wished I'd taken that lesson to heart much sooner. When morning came, I heard them whispering urgently in the guest room, checking on Thomas, who was undoubtedly nursing the after effects of whatever had been meant for me. I made coffee and prepared a simple breakfast of toast and eggs, playing the oblivious father and father-in-law one final time. "Sleep well?" I asked as they finally emerged, Thomas looking pale and unsteady on his feet. "Not particularly," he mumbled, wincing at the light streaming through the kitchen windows. "Headache?" I asked, my voice dripping with false sympathy. "I have some aspirin if you need it." The panicked look that passed between them almost made me smile. "No," Cynthia said quickly. "No, he's fine. Just needs some coffee." I poured them each a cup, noting how Thomas sniffed his suspiciously, before taking a tentative sip. "About that senior living place," I said casually, watching their expressions brighten with anticipated victory. "I'd like to see some brochures, maybe visit a few different options before making any decisions." "Of course, Dad," Cynthia said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "We want you to be comfortable with the choice. It's all about what's best for you." I covered her hand with mine, feeling the wedding ring I'd helped Thomas pick out when he'd asked for my blessing 10 years ago. Even then, I'd had reservations about him, but I'd pushed them aside because Cynthia seemed happy. "I know you." "Do, sweetheart," I said, meeting her eyes steadily. "Family takes care of family, after all." And in that moment, watching her smile at what she perceived as my capitulation, I silently amended that belief. Family takes care of family, until they don't. Then all bets are off. The game had begun, but only I knew the real rules. The morning. After the switched glasses incident, I watched Cynthia and Thomas drive away from my kitchen window. Thomas still looked unsteady, gripping the passenger door handle as Cynthia reversed down the driveway. They'd made excuses about needing to get home. Thomas had urgent work emails to answer, apparently. More likely, they needed time to regroup, to recalibrate whatever plan I'd inadvertently derailed. As their car disappeared around the corner, I felt a strange mixture of grief and resolve crystallize in my chest. For decades, I'd measured medications with precision, understanding that even a fraction of a milligram could mean the difference between healing and harm. Now, I needed to apply that same meticulous attention to my own survival. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Carter Pharmacy, how can I help you?" The voice was unfamiliar. Of course it would be. I'd sold the business 5 years ago. "Is Martin Williams still working there?" I asked. "I'm an old colleague." 3 minutes later, Martin's gruff voice came through the line. "Eddie? Haven't heard from you in what, 2 years? Everything okay?" Martin had been my most trusted pharmacist for 15 years before my retirement. More importantly, he'd become a friend, one of the few who'd checked on me regularly after Rebecca died. "Need your expertise on something delicate," I said. "Can we meet? Somewhere private?" The hesitation in his voice was brief. "My shift ends at 3. Diner on Maple." "Perfect. Thank you." I spent the next few hours gathering evidence, organizing, My notebook entries, securing the glasses in an additional container, and photographing the prescription bottle I'd found in their bathroom. I also made copies of my financial statements from the past 6 months, highlighting the unexplained withdrawals and transfers that had begun appearing with increasing frequency. At precisely 3:15, I slid into a back booth at May's Diner, a place Rebecca and I used to frequent when we were first married. Martin arrived 5 minutes later, his hair grayer but his handshake as firm as ever. "You look like hell, Eddie," he said bluntly after ordering coffee. "Feel worse than I look," I replied, attempting a smile that probably came across as a grimace. Martin leaned forward, lowering his voice. "What's going on? You're not one for dramatic meetups." I glanced around to ensure no one was within earshot, then quietly detailed the events of the past few months, culminating in last night's dinner. Martin's expression darkened as I spoke, his coffee cooling untouched before him. "You brought the glasses?" he asked when I finished. I nodded, discreetly showing him the sealed bag in my briefcase. "And you're sure it was lorazepam?" The prescription label was partially removed, but yes. 2 Demigadine tablets. Martin ran a hand over his face. "Jesus, Eddie, that, with alcohol could have. I know." The words hung between us, the unspoken conclusion too grim to voice aloud. "You need to go to the police," Martin said firmly. I shook my head. "Not yet. I need more evidence. Concrete proof of their intentions." "And what exactly do you think their intentions are?" I traced the rim of my coffee cup, gathering my thoughts. "Best case? Get me declared incompetent, take control of my finances, and stick me in some bargain basement care facility while they live comfortably on what I've spent a lifetime building." "Worst case?" Martin prompted, though his expression suggested he already knew. "I've been a pharmacist for 30 years, Martin. We both know there are compounds that leave little to no trace after death, especially in a man my age with a history of mild hypertension." Martin's face paled. He'd been thinking it too, just hadn't wanted to say it aloud. "What do you need from me?" "First, your professional opinion on what was likely in those glasses. Second, recommendations for testing facilities that don't ask too many questions." Martin nodded slowly. "I know a lab in Westridge. They do private testing. No police involvement required unless you authorize it. As for what was in there." He leaned back, considering. Based on Thomas's symptoms, the slurred speech, loss of coordination, rapid sedation, I'd bet on a benzodiazepine, probably the lorazepam you found. Mixed with alcohol, it could easily be mistaken for someone who's had too much to drink. "Exactly what I thought. But Eddie, this is serious. Elder abuse is a crime. Financial exploitation is a crime. Attempted." He lowered his voice further. "Murder is definitely a crime." "I know," I said, meeting his gaze steadily. "But she's still my daughter. I need to understand how far they're willing to go before I trailed off, unsure how to articulate what I wanted. "Before you destroy her life." Martin finished for me, not unkindly. I nodded, my throat tight. "I raised her, Martin. Taught her to ride a bike. Helped her with homework. Walked her down the aisle. How did we get here?" Martin reached across the table and gripped my wrist, a rare gesture of physical comfort from my normally reserved friend. "Sometimes the people we love aren't who we thought they were," he said quietly. "Or maybe they change and we don't notice until it's too late. Either way, you can't blame yourself." But I did blame myself for not seeing the signs earlier, for perhaps spoiling her as a child, trying to compensate for Rebecca's absence, for introducing her to Thomas at that pharmaceutical conference, thinking his ambition might complement her intelligence. "What's your plan?" Martin asked, releasing my wrist. "I need time to gather more evidence, which means I need to play along with their scheme to a point, make them think I'm getting more confused, more pliable. Meanwhile, I'll be documenting everything and securing my assets, Martin raised an eyebrow. You're going to pretend to be losing your faculties? That's a dangerous game, Eddie. I know, but it's the only way to find out exactly what they're planning without tipping them off. After discussing specifics for another hour, Martin agreed to help me get the glasses tested and to be available if I needed backup. As we were leaving, he paused at the door. You need allies in this, Eddie. People close by who can check on you, witness anything suspicious. Oh, thought of my neighbors. Most of them newer families who barely acknowledged me beyond a polite wave. But there was one. There's a woman next door, Eleanor Patel. Moved in about a year ago. We've spoken a few times over the fence. Reach out to her, Martin advised. You shouldn't be alone in that house with those two coming and going, not after. What happened? I promised I would consider it, though the idea of involving someone else in my family troubles felt awkward at best. We parted with a firm handshake and Martin's promise to call with information about the testing facility the next day. Driving home, I took a different route than usual, passing the cemetery where Rebecca was buried. On impulse, I pulled in, walking the familiar path to her headstone. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured grounds as I settled onto the bench we'd picked out together during those final, clear-eyed conversations about her impending death. We've got a situation, Bex, I said softly, using my old nickname for her. Not sure you'd have any better ideas than I do, but I could use your perspective. The wind rustled through nearby trees. Her answer, if I wanted to indulge in magical thinking. Rebecca had always been the pragmatic one, the one who saw people clearly while I gave second, third, and fourth chances. She's still our daughter, I continued, tracing the engraved letters of my wife's name. But I don't recognize her anymore. I sat there until the groundskeeper's golf cart whirred in the distance, signaling the cemetery's imminent closing. On the drive home, I made a decision. I would reach out to Eleanor Patel. Martin was right. I needed witnesses, allies close by. Eleanor answered my knock almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting by the door. A petite woman in her mid-60s, with silver-streaked black hair and sharp, observant eyes. "Edward," she said with evident surprise. "Is everything all right?" We'd exchanged pleasantries over the fence and once shared an afternoon of garden advice, but this was the first time I'd appeared at her door. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything," I began awkwardly. She waved away my concern. "Just finishing dinner. There's plenty if you'd like some." The unexpected kindness nearly undid me. When was the last time someone had simply offered me a meal without an agenda? Over surprisingly good homemade curry, I found myself sharing a carefully edited version of my concerns. That my daughter and son-in-law were becoming overly interested in my finances, that they seemed eager to move me from my home, that I'd overheard them discussing memory care options despite my mind being perfectly sound. Eleanor listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "May I speak frankly, Edward?" she asked when I finished. I nodded, bracing myself for dismissal or disbelief. "My father went through something similar with my brother," she said instead. By the time I realized what was happening, my brother had control of everything. The house, the bank accounts, even his medical decisions. It took 3 years and most of my savings to reverse it through the courts. I stared at her, momentarily speechless at finding such immediate understanding. "What happened to your brother?" I finally asked. A smile, cold and satisfied, curved her lips. "He underestimated how thoroughly an English professor could document evidence, and how persuasive I could be with a judge. For the first time, in months, I felt something like hope. I need help," I admitted, the words difficult after decades of self-reliance. "Someone who can witness their behavior, maybe help me gather evidence." Eleanor set down her fork, studying me with those keen eyes. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Edward?" "Be my eyes when I can't watch them. Help me document their actions. Maybe." I hesitated, then pressed on. Maybe help me install some security cameras inside my house. To my surprise, Eleanor didn't seem shocked by the request. Instead, she nodded thoughtfully. My nephew works in home security, she said. He can install systems that are practically invisible. No drilling or obvious wires, designed specifically for. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Situations like yours. You believe me? I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. Of course I believe you, she replied matter-of-factly. I've seen how they look at you when they visit. Like you're a problem to be managed, not a person to be respected. And I've heard them arguing in their car more than once, abruptly stopping when they notice someone might be listening. I hadn't realized Eleanor had been paying such close attention to my family dynamics. The thought was both comforting and slightly unsettling. Why would you help me? I asked. We barely know each other. She was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the pattern on her plate. Because no one helped my father until it was too late, she finally said. And because I recognize a good man being taken advantage of by people who should love him better. We spent the next 2 hours creating a plan. Eleanor would contact her nephew about the security system. Meanwhile, I would continue gathering documentation and secure my most important assets in ways Cynthia couldn't easily access. You should see an elder law attorney, Eleanor advised as I prepared to leave. Someone who specializes in these situations. I can recommend the one who helped me, if you'd like. I accepted her offer with gratitude, along with the container of leftover curry she insisted I take. At my doorstep, she placed a hand lightly on my arm. Edward, be careful with the act you're planning. People who are capable of drugging someone. They might not have boundaries you'd expect. The warning sent a chill through me, but I nodded my understanding. I won't underestimate them again. That night, I sat at my desk with a legal pad, mapping out the next phase of my plan. First, I would need to secure my most important financial assets without alerting Cynthia. Next, consult with the attorney Eleanor recommended. Then, allow the security system to be installed while maintaining my increasingly confused persona for Cynthia and Thomas's benefit. I glanced at the photo of Rebecca on my desk, taken on our 30th anniversary, her smile radiant despite the cancer treatments she'd been undergoing. I'm not going down without a fight, Bex, I promised her. Not after everything we built together. As if in response, the bedside phone rang, Cynthia's number lighting up the display. I took a deep breath, mentally shifting into the role I'd need to play, a slightly confused, increasingly pliable elderly father. When I answered, I made my voice sound tired, uncertain. Hello? Dad, it's Cynthia. Just checking to make sure you're okay tonight. The concern in her voice would have sounded genuine to anyone else. But now, I heard the calculation beneath it. Oh, I'm fine, sweetheart, I said, deliberately slurring my words slightly. Just took my evening pills and about to head to bed. What pills, Dad? Her voice sharpened with interest. I thought you were only on the blood pressure medication. The trap was subtle but obvious. She was fishing for signs of confusion, medication I didn't take or shouldn't be taking. The usual ones, I said vaguely. The ones in the blue pill case. I could practically hear her excitement at this apparent memory slip. Dad, your pills are in a green case, remember? I organized them for you last month. Green? Are you sure? I let confusion color my tone. I could have sworn. It's okay, Dad, she said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone again. These little mix-ups happen. That's why Thomas and I have been worried. Maybe you're right, I conceded, injecting a note of defeat into my voice. Things do seem to be getting away from me lately. That's why we want to help. Thomas and I will come by tomorrow to talk more about those senior living options, okay? Around 11? That would be nice, I said, then deliberately added, should I make lunch or will we be going out to that place with the good soup? The one near the library. There was no such place, but Cynthia didn't correct me. "Don't worry about lunch, Dad. I'll bring something. You just get a good night's sleep." After we hung up, I made detailed notes of our conversation, underlining the specific ways I'd played into her expectations and her eager acceptance of my supposed confusion. The performance left a bitter taste in my mouth. To deliberately appear diminished before my own child, to use her worst assumptions about me against her, felt like a betrayal of my own dignity. But I reminded myself of the stakes, of the switched glasses, of the lorazepam hidden in their bathroom. This wasn't just about protecting my autonomy or my property anymore. It was about survival in the most literal sense. The next morning, I called the attorney Eleanor had recommended, Patricia Silva, specializing in elder law. Her secretary offered me an appointment for the following week, but when I mentioned Eleanor's name and briefly outlined my situation, the woman put me on hold. A minute later, she returned with a new appointment time, 2 p.m. that same day. I spent the morning preparing for Cynthia and Thomas's visit, strategically misplacing items they would notice, reading glasses left in the refrigerator, slippers in the coat closet, the TV remote in a flower pot, small signs of a mind beginning to slip. At 10:55, I heard their car in the driveway. Taking a deep breath, I settled into my new role. Edward Wilson, loving father, retired pharmacist, and increasingly vulnerable target for the very people who should have protected me. The game was fully underway. But unknown to my daughter and son-in-law, the rules had changed. And for the first time since Rebecca's death, I felt truly awake, alert in a way that transcended mere consciousness. They thought I was fading. I would show them, methodically and irrefutably, just how wrong they were. Cynthia's face lit up when she spotted the TV remote in the flower pot. She exchanged a meaningful glance with Thomas, who nodded almost imperceptibly as he set down glossy brochures for Golden Sunset Estates. "Dad," Cynthia said gently, retrieving the remote, "did you put this here?" I manufactured a confused expression. I was looking for that this morning. How did it get there?" "It's okay," she soothed, patting my hand condescendingly. "These things happen." Thomas spread the brochures across my kitchen table while Cynthia unpacked lunch, deli sandwiches and a thermos of soup. I noticed she'd already poured the soup into a mug for me. I wouldn't be drinking that. "This place looks really nice, Eddie," Thomas said, pointing to a bland-looking apartment. "They have 24-hour medical staff, activities, transportation, and it's so close to our house," Cynthia added. "We could visit all the time." I picked up a brochure, deliberately holding it upside down before correcting myself with an embarrassed chuckle. "It does look nice, but I don't know if I can afford something like this." The predatory gleam in Thomas's eyes was unmistakable. "That's the beauty of it, Eddie. If we sell this house, you'll have more than enough. Real estate values in this neighborhood have skyrocketed. Sell the house?" I feigned surprise. "But this is my home. Rebecca and I." I trailed off, letting my voice catch on my late wife's name. Cynthia squeezed my hand. "Dad, we know you love this house, but be realistic. It's too big for one person. The maintenance, the stairs, the yard work, it's all becoming too much for you." "I manage," I muttered, then deliberately knocked over my water glass. As Cynthia mopped up the spill, Thomas casually opened a folder containing legal documents. "We've actually taken the liberty of getting some paperwork started," he said, sliding a document toward me. "Just preliminary stuff. Power of attorney, healthcare proxy, things that would let us help you more efficiently." My heart pounded, but I kept my expression neutral as I squinted at the papers. "I can't read this without my glasses." "Have you seen them, Cynthia?" "They were in the refrigerator, Dad. Remember? I put them on the counter." I shuffled through the papers slowly, noting that they'd already filled in many details, leaving only signature lines blank. Their presumption was breathtaking. "This is a lot to take in," I said finally. I think I need to sleep on it." I saw frustration flash across Thomas's face before he masked it. "Of course, Eddie, no rush." After they left, I reset my house to its proper order and prepared for my appointment with Patricia Silva, the elder law attorney Eleanor had recommended. In Patricia's warm, professional office, I detailed everything: the suspicious behavior, the drugged drink, the financial discrepancies, and the power of attorney documents they'd tried to get me to sign. "Mr. Wilson," she said when I'd finished, "what you're describing constitutes elder abuse and attempted financial exploitation, possibly worse. Have you considered going to the police?" "Not yet," I admitted. "I want to understand the full extent of their plan first. And she's still my daughter." Patricia's expression softened slightly. "I understand that complicates things emotionally, but my legal advice remains. This warrants criminal investigation." "What are my options if I'm not ready for that step?" She outlined a plan. File new. Power of attorney documents naming someone trustworthy. I chose Martin. Create a revocable trust for my major assets and get a documented capacity assessment. But I also wanted to gather more evidence. "Mr. Wilson, are you saying you want to set a trap for your own daughter?" When she put it that way, the plan sounded callous. But I thought of the drugged drink, of Thomas's eager eyes as he slid those papers toward me. "I want to know exactly what they intended to do to me," I said firmly, "and I want them to face proportional consequences." We settled on a middle path, securing critical assets immediately while leaving some accounts seemingly vulnerable, creating the appearance of declining capacity without surrendering control of anything significant. That evening, Eleanor's nephew Raj installed wireless cameras throughout my home, disguised as everyday objects: clock radios, picture frames, even a bird ornament on my bedroom windowsill. "The app is installed on your phone," Raj explained. "You can view live feeds or recorded footage. It's set to record when it detects motion." The next morning, Martin called with the lab results. "It was definitely lorazepam," he confirmed grimly. "About 4 mg/hour. With alcohol, that could have caused respiratory depression in someone your age. Eddie, this wasn't just about making you appear confused. This was dangerous." The confirmation hit me harder than expected. Some part of me had still been hoping for an innocent explanation. When Cynthia and Thomas returned the next day, I was prepared. I deliberately missed patches while shaving, left a pot boiling until the smoke alarm went off, and wore a sweater despite the warm day. Calculated signs of decline. "Dad, you look tired," Cynthia said immediately, cataloging my disheveled appearance with poorly disguised satisfaction. "On and off," I mumbled. "Had strange dreams. Your mother was in them." I deliberately used "your mother" instead of "Rebecca," a subtle verbal slip. Throughout lunch, I played my role, losing track of conversation, repeating questions, showing inappropriate emotional responses. Each slip was met with concealed satisfaction. "We brought those papers from last time," Thomas said as we finished eating. "And a few additional ones the retirement community needs." They spread the documents across the table: power of attorney forms, healthcare directives, real estate authorizations, and banking forms. I pretended to read them, asking for clarification on purposely confusing terms. "So this means you'll help me with my banking?" I asked innocently, pointing to the durable power of attorney. "Exactly," Thomas said. "We'll make sure everything's taken care of so you don't have to worry." "That's thoughtful," I said, then deliberately added, "Rebecca always handled the finances. I never was good with numbers despite all those medication calculations." Another red flag for them. A pharmacist claiming to be bad with numbers. "And this one?" I pointed to the healthcare proxy. "That lets us make medical decisions if you're unable to," Cynthia explained. "I see," I murmured. "Like if I fell, or had an accident at home." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "Exactly. or any situation where you might be confused. I nodded slowly, then reached for a pen. Where do I sign? The naked relief on their faces would have been comical under other circumstances. I signed with a shaky hand, deliberately making my signature look different from my usual precise script, with a small modification Patricia had advised that would help invalidate it later. There, I said. All done. Now you don't have to worry about me anymore. We'll always worry about you, Dad, Cynthia said, gathering the papers with poorly concealed excitement. That's what family does. Yes, I agreed, looking her directly in the eyes. Family takes care of family. For just a moment I thought I saw a flicker of shame cross her face, but it vanished quickly, replaced by her practiced smile. After they left with my signed documents, I called Patricia to report that they'd taken the bait. Then I reviewed the footage from the hidden cameras. Most damning was a moment when I'd left to use the bathroom. Thomas hurriedly photographed the signed documents while Cynthia kept watch. Got them, he whispered triumphantly. I'll scan everything. To the lawyer tonight. How soon can we get the house listed? Cynthia asked. Tomorrow, if the power of attorney checks out. My buddy at Coldwell Banker already has it queued up. We should clear at least $400,000 after the mortgage. And Dad's accounts. Once this goes through, we can transfer everything to the joint account. We'll leave enough in his checking to keep up appearances. But the investment portfolio is substantial. Nearly $800,000. The casual way they discussed liquidating my life, the home I'd shared with Rebecca, the savings we'd carefully built over decades, sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with age. I watched them on camera, these strangers wearing the faces of my family, and felt a strange calm settle over me. Any lingering doubt about exposing their scheme evaporated. That evening, Eleanor came over with dinner. As we ate, I showed her portions of the footage. "Oh, Edward," she said softly, her hand covering mine. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Now I know exactly what I'm dealing with." "What's the next step?" she asked. "They'll be back in 2 days to start sorting my possessions. I've already secured everything of true value. Then we spring. The trap. Patricia has filed the revocation of power of attorney and prepared cease and desist letters. You've thought of everything." "Not quite," I admitted. "I still haven't decided whether to file criminal charges." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a personal choice, Edward, but remember what they were willing to do to you." "She's still my daughter," I said softly. "For all her flaws, she's still Rebecca's child." "Yes," Eleanor acknowledged, "but she's also an adult who made deliberate decisions to harm her father. Perhaps the most loving thing you can do, for both of you, is to ensure she faces the consequences." I didn't have an answer yet. But as I checked the security cameras one last time before bed, I made a promise to myself. This would be the last time anyone mistook my kindness for weakness, my age for vulnerability, or my love for blindness. The Edward Wilson who had switched those glasses had awakened something long dormant within me, a fierce determination that transcended age and physical limitation. That Edward Wilson was fully awake now, clear-eyed and resolved, and that Edward Wilson was ready for whatever came next. The morning, Cynthia and Thomas were scheduled to return and begin sorting my possessions. I woke to find my cell phone screen blank and unresponsive. Dead. I'd plugged it in to charge overnight as usual, but the charging cord had been subtly frayed near the connector, something I was certain hadn't been that way the previous evening. Chill ran through me. They'd been in my house while I slept. I immediately checked the security camera footage on my laptop, which thankfully was locked in my bedroom with me overnight. Sure enough, at 2:18 a.m. the cameras captured Thomas using a spare key I didn't know they had, carefully disabling the chain lock from the outside using some kind of thin tool. They'd moved through my house with practiced stealth, Thomas checking. My bedroom, finding me asleep, while Cynthia systematically examined drawers in my study, photographing documents. Before leaving, Thomas had deliberately damaged my phone charger, likely hoping to sever my connection to Eleanor and Martin. I felt violated in a way that transcended the legal implications. They'd invaded my home, my sanctuary, my last bastion of privacy and dignity. With trembling hands, I called Eleanor from my landline. "They were in my house last night," I said without preamble when she answered. "While I was sleeping." "I'm coming over," she said immediately. "Don't touch anything they might have disturbed." Within 20 minutes, Eleanor arrived with a spare charger for my phone and a hardened expression I hadn't seen on her face before. "This changes things," she said as we reviewed the footage together. "Breaking and entering is a serious criminal offense. So is tampering with your phone. That could be considered attempted isolation, another form of elder abuse." "They're getting desperate," I agreed. "They must suspect something's not right with those papers they had me sign." As my phone powered back up, I saw multiple missed calls from Patricia Silva's office. Eleanor urged me to return the call immediately. "Edward," Patricia said when I reached her, "I'm glad you called. There's been a development. Your daughter and son-in-law attempted to access your investment account yesterday afternoon. The bank flagged it because of the alert we placed." "Did they succeed?" I asked, my throat tightening. "No, but they presented the power of attorney and were quite insistent. The manager called me as instructed. 'Mr. Wilson, they're moving very quickly. Too quickly. They were in my house last night,' I told her, explaining what the cameras had captured. Patricia was silent for a moment. "This has escalated beyond financial exploitation. I strongly recommend you not be alone when they return today. And, frankly, I believe it's time to involve the authorities." I found myself nodding, though the thought of having my daughter arrested still felt like a knife twisting in my chest. "What's the process for that?" "I can contact Adult Protective Services and the police on your behalf. The video evidence is compelling, and combined with the laboratory results from the drugged drink and the attempted financial access, we have a strong case." As I hung up, Eleanor placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. "I'll stay with you until this is resolved," she promised. We spent the next hour preparing for Cynthia and Thomas's arrival. Patricia dispatched her assistant to my home with additional legal documents and contacted authorities. I secured my most personal items in a lockbox that Eleanor would take to her house for safekeeping. At precisely 11 a.m., Cynthia and Thomas arrived, carrying empty storage boxes and wearing expressions of concerned efficiency that now seemed sinister rather than helpful. "Dad, you're already up and dressed," Cynthia said, sounding almost disappointed. She'd clearly expected to find me more disoriented today. "I had a good night's sleep," I replied, carefully monitoring my performance. Today, I needed to appear just confused enough to maintain their confidence, but not so impaired that I'd seem unable to consent to what was coming. "Who's this?" Thomas asked sharply, noticing Eleanor sitting quietly in my living room. "My neighbor, Eleanor," I explained. "She's been helping me with some household tasks." "That's very kind," Cynthia said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But we're here now, so we can take over." Eleanor met her gaze steadily. "Edward's been telling me about your plans to move him to that retirement community. Sounds like a big transition." "It's what's best for him," Thomas said dismissively. "Eddie, why don't we get started in your bedroom? Decide what clothes you'll take with you?" "Actually," I said, "I've been thinking about all this. The move, the paperwork, selling the house, it's happening very quickly." Cynthia sat beside me on the sofa, taking my hand in hers. "Dad, we've discussed this. You agreed it was for the best." "Did I?" I asked, injecting genuine confusion into my voice. "I remember signing some papers, but I'm not sure I understood everything." Thomas's jaw tightened. "The papers were very clear, Eddie, and you seemed fine with the arrangements yesterday." "That's another thing," I said slowly. "I don't think I've been feeling quite like myself lately, especially after meals or drinks with you two. The look that flashed between Cynthia and Thomas would have confirmed my suspicions even without the prior evidence. "That's why we're concerned," Cynthia. "Recovered quickly. These memory issues, the confusion. It's exactly why you need more support." The doorbell rang, causing both of them to startle. "Are you expecting someone?" Thomas asked sharply. "Probably just the mail," I said vaguely. Eleanor rose to answer the door. A moment later, she returned with Patricia Silva and 2 police officers. Me. Color drained from Cynthia's face. "Dad, what's going on?" "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson," Patricia said formally. "I'm Patricia Silva, Mr. Wilson's attorney. I've been asked to inform you that the power of attorney and other documents you obtained yesterday have been legally revoked. Furthermore, Mr. Wilson has filed a complaint regarding several concerning incidents." Thomas stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. Eddie clearly needs help. He's been showing signs of dementia for months. We're his family. We're trying to protect him." One of the officers stepped forward. "Sir, we have a warrant to examine electronic devices in your possession, specifically any containing photographs of documents belonging to Edward Wilson." "This is absurd," Thomas sputtered, instinctively reaching for his phone. "You can't just—" "We also have footage," I said quietly, "of you entering my home unauthorized at 2:18 this morning." Cynthia's head snapped toward me, shock replacing her practiced concern. "What are you talking about? Dad, you're confused." "I'm not confused, Cynthia," I interrupted, my voice stronger than it had been in months. "I haven't been confused at all. The lorazepam you've been slipping into my drinks might have worked if I hadn't switched glasses with Thomas that night." The silence that followed was deafening. Cynthia's eyes filled with tears. Whether from shame or frustration at being caught, I couldn't tell. "You don't understand," she finally whispered. "We were trying to help you. By drugging me, by attempting to sell my home, by trying to transfer my investments to your account." Each question struck like a physical blow, making her flinch. "Thomas. Recovered first. You can't prove any of that." "Actually," Patricia interjected, "we can. We have laboratory confirmation of lorazepam in the glass, video evidence of your unauthorized entry, documentation of your attempt to access Mr. Wilson's, accounts and testimony from the bank manager about your concerning behavior." The officers moved forward, asking Thomas to surrender his phone and informing both him and Cynthia of their rights. As they were led toward the police cruiser for further questioning, Cynthia looked back at me, her expression a complex mixture of anger and something like grief. "Dad," she said, her voice breaking, "I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe that." I met her gaze steadily. "I wish I could, Cynthia." After they were gone, I sank onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation ebbed away, leaving me feeling every one of my 72 years. "Are you all right?" Eleanor asked gently, sitting beside me. "No," I answered honestly. "I don't think I will be for quite some time." Patricia reviewed what would happen next. Cynthia and Thomas would be formally charged with attempted financial exploitation, breaking and entering, and possibly elder abuse pending further investigation. There would be court appearances, statements to give, evidence to review. "You can still decide not to press charges," she reminded me. "It's your choice." I thought about the daughter I'd raised, the little girl who once brought me dandelions and called them flowers, the teenager who'd cried on my shoulder when her first boyfriend broke up with her, the young woman who'd clutched my arm as I walked her down the aisle. Then I thought about the woman who had systematically tried to strip me of my autonomy, my home, and possibly my life. "I need to proceed," I said finally, "not out of vengeance, but because there have to be consequences." That night, after everyone had left, I sat alone in my living room, truly alone for the first time in weeks. The house felt both emptier and somehow more mine than it had since this ordeal began. I picked up Rebecca's photograph from the mantel. "I don't know if I did the right thing," I told her still face, "but I did the necessary thing." The next morning brought new obstacles. Thomas's brother, a local businessman with significant community connections, called to berate me for tearing the family apart. He threatened to hire lawyers who would prove I was incompetent and have the charges dismissed. Cynthia's close friend, a woman I'd known for years, stopped by unannounced to plead her case, claiming Thomas was the true architect of the scheme, that Cynthia had been manipulated and coerced. "She made mistakes, Edward. Terrible ones," the friend acknowledged. "But she's your only child. Do you really want to see her in prison?" These appeals to family loyalty might once have swayed me. Now they only strengthened my resolve. "What I wanted," I told the friend calmly, "was a daughter who wouldn't try to drug her father to gain control of his assets. We don't always get what we want." The hardest moment came when I received a handwritten letter from Cynthia, delivered by her lawyer. Her words were a masterpiece of manipulation, shifting between apology, justification, and subtle guilt-inducing, reminders of all she claimed to have done for me over the years. "I only wanted to protect you from yourself," she wrote. "You've been so withdrawn since Mom died, so stubborn about accepting help. Thomas went too far. I see that now. But can't. You find it in your heart to forgive your only daughter?" I read the letter 3 times, searching for genuine remorse, finding instead carefully crafted emotional leverage. Even now, she was trying to manage me rather than face her actions honestly. I placed the letter in Patricia's hands as additional evidence and proceeded with the case. Through it all, my support system grew stronger. Martin rearranged his work schedule to drive me to appointments. Eleanor became a daily presence, her practical kindness a balm to my wounded spirit. Patricia's steady legal guidance gave me confidence that justice would prevail. 6 weeks after that confrontation in my living room, I sat in a courtroom watching Cynthia and Thomas accept a plea deal that included probation, community service, financial restitution, and mandatory counseling. No prison time, but a permanent record of their crimes, a consequence that would follow them far longer than any short incarceration. As the judge accepted the plea, Cynthia looked back at me one last time. In her eyes, I saw not the remorse I'd hoped for, but a simmering resentment. She still didn't truly understand what she'd done wrong, and in that moment, I finally accepted what Eleanor had been gently suggesting all along. Sometimes the parent-child relationship cannot be salvaged. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is establish boundaries that protect both of you from further harm. I walked out of that courtroom not as a victorious warrior, but as a man who had fought for his dignity and won, at tremendous cost. The battle had changed me, hardened me in some ways, clarified my priorities in others. That evening, as I watered the plants on my porch, the home that remained mine, the life that remained under my control, I felt a curious sense of peace begin to take root alongside the grief. I had survived. I had prevailed. And, most importantly, I had refused to be diminished. 3 months after the court case, I was slowly rebuilding my life. The legal nightmare had ended, but the emotional aftershocks continued. I hadn't spoken to Cynthia since the sentencing. Her probation terms included no contact without my explicit consent, which I hadn't given. Some days the silence felt like peace, other days like an amputation. I was pruning roses in my front garden when a sleek black car pulled into my driveway. A woman I didn't recognize emerged, mid-40s, expensively dressed with Cynthia's eyes and jawline. "Mr. Wilson," she approached, cautiously. "I'm Jennifer Lowell, Rebecca's niece." I stared in disbelief. Rebecca's sister's daughter, whom I hadn't seen since she was a teenager at Rebecca's funeral. "Jenny?" I set down my pruning shears. "It's been 15 years, I know." She smiled apologetically. May I come in? There's something important I need to discuss with you. Over coffee in my kitchen, Jennifer explained her sudden appearance. I saw the court records when researching a case for work. I'm an attorney in Boston. I couldn't believe what Cynthia and Thomas did to you. Family drama at its worst, I said, attempting lightness and failing. It's more than that, Uncle Eddie. She hadn't called me that since childhood. There's something you need to know about. Thomas. Jennifer opened her briefcase and withdrew a folder. After seeing the case, I did some digging. Thomas has done this before. The documents she spread before me told a sickening story. Before marrying Cynthia, Thomas had been briefly engaged to a wealthy widow nearly 20 years his senior. She'd died unexpectedly after changing her will in his favor. Though investigated, nothing was proven. He'd also worked as a financial advisor with a suspicious pattern of elderly clients who gave him unusually generous gifts. I don't think Cynthia was the mastermind, Jennifer said gently. I think she was his accomplice, possibly manipulated herself. My hands trembled as I examined the evidence. Does Cynthia know about this history? I don't know, but I've submitted this information to the prosecutor's office. They're reopening investigations into some of Thomas's previous relationships. After Jennifer left, with promises to stay in touch, I sat in my garden, processing this revelation. Had my daughter been a victim too? Or a willing participant? The seed of doubt took root, not absolving Cynthia but complicating my understanding of her actions. That evening, as I discussed these developments with Eleanor over dinner, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Mr. Wilson. A woman's tentative voice. This is Diane Kellerman, Thomas's first wife. My conversation with Diane lasted nearly 2 hours. She described a charming man who gradually isolated her from friends and family, who subtly undermined her confidence and independence, who became increasingly controlling when she inherited money from her father. I escaped with nothing but my car and some clothes, she concluded. I considered myself lucky. When I saw the news about your case, I knew I had to contact you. The next morning, I called Patricia Silva. I need to speak with my daughter. The meeting was arranged at Patricia's office, neutral territory with legal supervision. Cynthia arrived looking thinner, subdued, a shadow of her former confidence. "Dad," she whispered when I entered, half rising from her chair before uncertainly sinking back down. "I've learned some things about Thomas's past," I began without preamble. "Things that make me wonder if you knew who you were really married to." Her reaction told me everything. The color draining from her face, the involuntary clutching of her hands. "What things?" she asked hoarsely. I laid out what Jennifer and Diane had shared. With each revelation, Cynthia seemed to physically shrink, until finally she covered her face with her hands. "I didn't know about the widow or the clients," she said, her voice muffled. "But I knew something wasn't right. He was always finding elderly people to help with their finances, always calculating inheritance values, probate timeframes, and yet you helped him target your own father," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions. "It started small," she whispered. "Suggestions that you were becoming forgetful, then checking your accounts just to make sure everything was in order, then the medication to help you sleep on nights we visited." She finally looked up, tears streaming down her face. By the time I realized how far it had gone, I was in too deep. He had evidence of me administering the medication. He controlled all our finances. She stopped abruptly. "He what, Cynthia?" "He threatened me." She admitted, so softly I almost missed it. "Said if I backed out, he'd make sure I went to prison while he walked free." I wanted to believe her. Part of me desperately needed to believe her. But I'd been deceived too thoroughly to accept anything without verification. "If this is true," I said carefully, "why didn't you mention it during the legal proceedings?" "Fear," she said simply, "and shame, and I didn't think anyone would believe me." "I need time to process this," I told her. And I'll need evidence, not just your word." She nodded, resignation and a flicker of hope warring in her expression. There might be emails, recordings. Thomas documented everything as insurance, if I can find them. 2 weeks later, Cynthia delivered a USB drive to Patricia containing emails, voice recordings, and financial records that substantially supported her claims. Thomas had indeed coerced and threatened her, though the evidence also showed her initial willingness before attempting to back out. With this new evidence, the prosecutor reopened Thomas's case, separating it from Cynthia's. She accepted a revised plea with reduced penalties in exchange for testifying against him. Thomas eventually received a 10-year sentence for multiple counts of elder abuse, fraud, and criminal threatening across several cases. My relationship with Cynthia remained fragile, complicated by painful truths on both sides. We began cautious, supervised visits, building toward something that might eventually resemble forgiveness, if not the easy trust we once shared. On a cool autumn evening, exactly 1 year after that fateful dinner where I'd switched our glasses, I sat with Eleanor on my porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery oranges and pinks. "Do you ever wonder if you could have done anything differently?" she asked, her hand resting comfortably beside mine. "Every day," I admitted. But then I remember what Thomas might have done if I hadn't caught him. How many others he might have victimized if he hadn't been stopped. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "You didn't just save yourself, Edward. You potentially saved others." I thought about Jennifer and Diane, about the reopened investigations that had brought closure to other families, about the assisted living facility that had implemented new training after the case made headlines. "There's a certain victory in that," I agreed. The victory wasn't what I'd imagined when this began. It wasn't complete or unblemished. My relationship with my daughter would never be fully restored. The betrayal had left permanent scars. But I had reclaimed my life, my autonomy, my right to age with dignity on my own terms. I had learned to trust my instincts, to value my hard-earned wisdom over others' patronizing assumptions. I had discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed and built connections I never expected to find. As dusk settled around us, Eleanor's hand found mine, her fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that spoke of companionship rather than caretaking, of choice rather than necessity. Sometimes victory isn't about perfect endings. Sometimes it's simply about continuing to write your own story when others try to wrest the pen from your hand. And as I sat there, watching night claim the sky, I knew my story was far from over. 2 years after switching glasses with Thomas, my life had found a rhythm I never expected in my 70s. The house that Cynthia and Thomas had so desperately wanted to sell had become a sanctuary reimagined. I'd converted the unused dining room into a reading nook and transformed the backyard into a Japanese-inspired garden, something Rebecca had always wanted. Eleanor and I had settled into a companionship that defied simple labels. Not quite romance, but deeper than friendship. A partnership of equals who had both weathered significant storms. We maintained separate homes but shared meals several times a week, attended community events together, and traveled occasionally to visit her children or my newly reconnected extended family. "You're smiling more," Eleanor observed one morning as we prepared breakfast in my kitchen. "It looks good on you." "I have reasons to," I replied, squeezing her hand briefly before, returning to the coffee I was brewing. My relationship with Cynthia remained complex. After Thomas received his sentence, she'd moved across the state, found work as an office manager, and started therapy. Our contact was limited to monthly phone calls and occasional supervised visits, boundaries I maintained not from vindictiveness, but self-preservation. During her last visit, she'd brought photos of her new apartment, proudly showing me the small balcony garden she'd planted. "Remember how Mom could grow anything?" she'd asked, a tentative olive branch of shared memory. And she Used to say you had her green thumb, I'd responded, allowing the moment of connection. These interactions remained measured, weighted with history that couldn't be erased. Some days, the father in me ached for the easy relationship we'd once had. Other days, the survivor in me recognized the necessity of these careful boundaries. Martin retired that spring, and we celebrated with a fishing trip to the lake where we'd spent countless weekends in our younger years. Sitting in companionable silence as our lines drifted in the water, he asked the question most people tactfully avoided. "Do you think you'll ever fully forgive her?" I considered this as carefully as I once measured critical medications. "Forgiveness isn't the problem," I finally answered. "Trust is. I can forgive what happened while still protecting myself from its repetition." "Wise stance," he nodded, reeling in his empty line. Though not everyone would see the distinction. Not everyone had their daughter try to drug them into compliance, I replied with a wry smile that would have been impossible a year earlier. That summer brought an unexpected development. Jennifer, Rebecca's niece who had helped uncover Thomas's past, invited me to her daughter's high school graduation in Boston. The trip represented my first significant travel since the ordeal, and I found myself hesitant. "You should go," Eleanor encouraged. "Reconnect with Rebecca's family. They're still your family, too." The graduation ceremony was unremarkable in the way all such ceremonies are. Long speeches about bright futures, the ritualistic walk across a stage, proud parents snapping endless photos. What wasn't ordinary was sitting in the audience surrounded by Rebecca's sister, brother-in-law, and their extended family, all of whom welcomed me as if the 15-year absence had been 15 days. "We should have reached out sooner," Rebecca's sister Margaret confessed over dinner that evening. "After Becky died, and then when you sold the pharmacy, life just carried on, and suddenly years had passed." "I'm equally guilty," I admitted. "Grief makes hermits of many of us." "Well, no more of that," Margaret declared with Rebecca's characteristic decisiveness. "You're stuck with us now, Eddie." That night in my hotel room, I found myself talking to Rebecca as I often did in private. Moments. "Your family has adopted me again, Bex. Better late than never, I suppose." The trip proved cathartic in unexpected ways. Being among people who had loved Rebecca, who shared memories of her that even I hadn't heard, who carried echoes of her in their mannerisms and expressions, it filled spaces in my heart that had remained vacant even as the rest of my life rebuilt itself. Upon returning home, I made a decision I'd been contemplating for months. I contacted Patricia Silva about changing my will. "Nothing dramatic," I assured her as we met in her office. "I'm not disinheriting Cynthia entirely, but I want to create a more nuanced legacy. The revised will reflected my evolved perspective. Cynthia would receive a reasonable portion, enough to help, not enough to harm. Another portion went to Jennifer's children for education. The largest share, however, would establish a small foundation focused on preventing elder abuse through education and legal assistance. The Edward and Rebecca Wilson Dignity Fund." Patricia read from the document. "I think Rebecca would approve." "She always was the wiser one when it came to helping others," I said. "I'm just following her example, belatedly." As my 75th birthday approached, Eleanor conspired with Martin and other friends to throw a small celebration. I protested the fuss, but secretly appreciated it. The gathering was intimate, just 12 people who represented my reconfigured life. During the casual dinner in my backyard, Jennifer raised her glass. "To Uncle Eddie, who taught us all that it's never too late to stand up for yourself." The toast touched me deeply, but what followed moved me more. Each person shared a brief story of how my experience had rippled into their lives. Martin had started volunteering at a senior center, helping residents understand their rights. Eleanor had organized a neighborhood watch focused on elderly neighbors living alone. Jennifer had taken pro bono cases involving elder law. "You created something important," Eleanor told me privately as the evening wound down. Not just survival, but meaning. Later, after everyone had gone and Eleanor had returned to her home next door, I sat in my garden, watching fireflies illuminate the summer darkness. I thought about the concept of legacy, how we hope to be remembered, what marks we leave behind. 2 years earlier, my only thought had been survival, outmaneuvering those who sought to diminish me. Now, I understood that the journey had transformed me in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The violation of trust had ultimately expanded my world rather than shrinking it. The next morning, I received a letter from Cynthia, our primary mode of communication between visits. Inside was a brochure for a local college and a brief note. I've enrolled in courses to become a certified counselor, focusing on family dynamics and elder care. I know it doesn't erase what happened, but I hope it's a step toward making something meaningful from our experience. The professor suggested we identify our motivation for entering this field. I wrote, to understand the damage caused by treating people as means rather than ends, and to help prevent others from making my mistakes. Cynthia. I read the note 3 times, recognizing it as neither request nor expectation, but simply information shared, perhaps the healthiest communication we'd had in years. That evening, walking with Eleanor along the neighborhood path we frequently traveled, I found myself unusually reflective. "What's on your mind?" she asked, sensing my mood. "I was thinking about the unexpected turns life takes," I replied. "How the worst betrayal I've ever experienced somehow led to this." I gestured vaguely at the peaceful scene around us, at our companionable stride, at the life I'd reclaimed and reshaped. "You know what they say about being buried?" Eleanor smiled, squeezing my hand. "Some people don't realize they're planting a seed." I laughed at the apt metaphor. I was certainly buried, but what grew wasn't what anyone expected. We continued our walk in comfortable silence as twilight settled around us. My pace was slower than it had been 2 years ago, my joints a bit stiffer. But my spine was straighter, my gaze clearer, my voice more certain. At 75, I had learned that dignity isn't given or taken. It's claimed and maintained through daily choices, through boundaries honored and courage exercised. Rebecca would have been proud of that realization, I think. She always did tell me I was a late bloomer. I'm really wondering now, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Have you faced something like this before? Let me know in the comments. And while you think about it, I'm leaving 2 of the most loved stories from the channel.